Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. So firstly, thank you to everyone for joining us here today for the latest in a continuing series of Sikh Press Association Open Forum discussions. We've previously done one on mental health and one on the perception of Khalistan in the media. And today we're looking at Sikhs in politics. Why is the Sikh Press Association holding an event on Sikhs in politics? We are often asked by the media about certain issues which are discussed in political realms. And what we always attempt to do is simply reflect Sangat sentiment. So that means the general feeling, the consensus of the Sikh community at large. That obviously isn't always possible. So what we do then is look at the Panthic organizations that are involved in any of these discussions, and we put them forward to discuss this in the media. In doing so, though, we often get asked about, what about this position, what about that, how does this work, and what more can be done in certain situations in regards to how our political representatives are working in those realms. So we organize this event simply for you all, the Sangat, all of our viewers, to get a better understanding of how Sikhs in politics work and how it can work, or if at all it can work, for the betterment of the Panth entirely. For those that don't know, the Sikh Press Association is an organization powered by Everything's 13. They're the same group that have brought you Basics of Sikhi, Mighty Khalsa, and Kiddie Sangat. With that in mind, we are a organization that is funded by a charity. This event itself here today cost us over £400. So any contributions would be greatly, greatly appreciated, especially if you think these are worthwhile for us to continue putting on. If you cannot donate right here, right now, you can go to SikhPA.com, scroll to the bottom, you'll see a donate button. Simply donate online through there. And moving on long term, you might have seen an appeal from Basics of Sikhi on behalf of the entire Everything's 13 organization for 5,000 donors to come forward to donate just £5 a month, not much more than your average Starbucks coffee, which will help organizations like the Sikh Press Association, like Basics of Sikhi, maintain what we're currently doing. So please bear that in mind. As you're leaving, there will be a bucket there for you to donate. Now, let's let the show begin. I'm going to hand over to our host, Sukh Singh Sodhi, who's going to introduce the panelists, and then we're going to go straight on to our first question. This is an interactive open forum discussion, so if at any point you do have questions, simply raise your hand, literally at any point, but every question will end with an opportunity for audience involvement. We might not be able to get to everyone that does have a question or an opinion that they want to offer, but we will try our best. Thanks all for listening, and once again, thanks all for attending. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'm Sukh Singh Sodhi, and I'll be the host of this event today. I'll be here hosting the panelists. Without further ado, I want to introduce the panelists to you. So on my left, we have Inderjeet Singh. Inderjeet Singh is a well-accomplished civil servant. He's in the Prime Minister's Strategy Unit for over a decade at the top of the civil service. Also one of the youngest councillors elected as well, back in the 90s in London. Back in the day. So that's Inderjeet Singh. And then we have Sukhi Kaur. Sukhvinder Kaur, she's stood to be a candidate at the last election, at the local elections, and has also done a lot of work with the charity Sikh Relief. You might have heard of them, the Sikh Organisation for Prisoners' Welfare. Benji's been heavily involved in that. And then to my right, we have Harsimrat Kaur, co-founder of Sikh Tories and a mathematician. And next to her, we have Lord Singh, who is the first turbaned peer in the House of Lords, a crossbencher in the House of Lords. And then we have Dabinderjeet Singh, who is a director at the National Audit Office. He's held that post for quite a long time now, and he's also principal advisor to the Sikh Federation. So just to begin, I'll explain that we have 5 questions today, and our panel has seen these questions in advance. They have notes on these questions as well. I will introduce the question, and then I'll be going to different people on the panel for their response. and then other people in the panel can chip in and provide their response, and then hopefully if there's enough time we can come to you as well. Each question will end, as Jasveer Singh said, with coming to you, the audience, for your comments and your questions as well related to the question. And then if we have time right at the end, we can open it up to a more sort of general question and answer session on this topic, which is Sikhs in UK politics. So the first question is, what barriers do Sikhs face in getting involved in politics? So I'll repeat that again. What barriers do Sikhs face in getting involved in politics? And first up, I want to come to Sukhi Kaur, because she was probably the most recent candidate in this topic, in this field, stood only last month. So Sukhi Kaur.
Thank you very much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. And thank you for the invite to be on the show. I'm a very novel politician. My campaign in the local elections was our first. And going back to the question about barriers, I think I can only give my personal experiences, being a woman, being an activist, having 2 young children, it is hard. I mean, when you're campaigning, and you're campaigning in what was perceived to be, I was put in an unwinnable seat, the token Bain candidate in an unwinnable seat. But you're campaigning, you're door knocking, you're putting yourself up against abuse sometimes, especially some parts of the ward I was standing in. And so you are making yourself vulnerable, and it's that lack of support really. And I think the biggest barrier is not just in politics, I think, for women coming forward in any form of seva, be pantik, it saddens me to say that sometimes it's our own that place barriers on women. I am one of 2 women who sit on the executive of the Sikh Council, and the history of other women that have sat on the Sikh Council has not been a pleasant one. There was just a conversation that I took place with a very respected female scholar who talked about a very well-known organisation giving her abuse, intimidation, about the things that she was talking about not meeting their perceived agenda of what should be priorities for the Sikh agenda. So yeah, it is a difficult space, and we've got a lot of work to do as a community to not be barriers to our own people, I think, and especially to women, because there is that, and I'm going to say it. You know, when you're a woman and you put yourself out there being a spokesperson for a very well-known charity, the abuse that I had when I was very forthright in some of my opinions, you know, it can be via social media, it can be via phone calls, threatening phone calls, and this is just from our own people. And, you know, it has to be put out there because it is an issue, and we do need to work at 1, calling it out, 2, moving away from that to support our women to become the future leaders that we know that they're capable to be. And it shouldn't be such a battle.
Inda, do you think it's been quite a while since you've stood as a councillor and you've seen a lot going on in that time? What would you say are the main barriers to Sikhs getting involved in politics?
Thank you for the question. I suppose if we start with a clear focus on the Sikhi backdrop, which is Miri Piri, and if we use that as our sort of route into politics, there shouldn't be any issue. And I'm very sad to hear what Sukh just said and expressed. And it's very sad that in 2018, women in our community are facing those sort of hurdles and barriers. I condemn that outright. I think we all should condemn it. In terms of the barriers themselves, I mean, we have several. The political institutions that we subscribe to, be it Labour, Conservative, Liberal Democrats, God forgive UKIP, who are almost finished, any other, the Greens are in ascendancy at the minute. So we have different labels, and we've got those across the panel here today. So we need to work within those systems that exist, and there are barriers within that. You will face racism within those institutions. We need to be real about that. The Labour Party has no monopoly on anti-racist policies. I can vouch for that, having been a Labour councillor in my youth, one of the first elected in London in the 90s. So the racism is alive and kicking. Shami Chakravarti wrote a report only last year, which was published by the Labour Party, where she condemned racism and anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And I'm sad to say that's also prevalent in the Conservative Party. But you hear it more because of Corbyn is being knocked around silly by the national press, and we know who controls the national press in this country in terms of the broadsheets. The Murdoch press is not a fan of the Labour Party. Neither is it a fan of the Tory party, I would say. It's a marriage of convenience for them. These are barons who control our media. There you have it. You have the political process where you must engage, you must deal with the barriers of racism, prejudice, and sexism within those structures that exist. Labour Party, to date, hasn't had a Labour Prime Minister from a woman back, whether there's lots of debate going on around transgender and all of that. I want to get into that today. But those are the real conundrums that we need to deal with. I also wrote down financial barriers. There's also a class thing in this. If you're not financially stable, it's almost like this is the fiefdom of the well-off. And you will see the representation across our national, local government and central government level, even the European level. People who are well-off and well looked after by their parents and others can indulge in this sort of activity. So that is also something that you need to be real about. I'm not saying it can't be done. If you're not well off, but there is a way. If there is a passion, drive, and the support there for you, the structural support of mentoring from others that have been there before. I mean, I'll give you a real example where Devinderjeet Singh, sitting on my right here, will know that when I left the civil service, one of the things I wanted to do was set up a Sikh Leadership Academy, essentially to focus on this, to make sure young people and old from our community could learn from the mistakes that we've made in the past and don't repeat them again, and also talk about the wider issue in politics. What you have is a 4-year cycle. What you don't have is, what you don't get sight of, is the civil service, who is a continuous cycle. Those people are there for life, and they are the people who run the bureaucracy in this country, and we don't get it as a community where the power really lies. You only need to see the 1984 papers that were discovered in the National Archives, and what wonderful my former boss did with the inquiry that he led on as the Cabinet Secretary. And that was a whitewash, and we know it, and William Hague stood up in House of Commons and gave a wonderful closure on that, and people are still banging their drum in our community around that, rightly so. Final thing I'd say on this is that the Sangat needs to be supportive. The structures within our community need to be there. We don't have the institutions, frankly. Sukh mentioned the Sikh Council. I can mention we've got the conservative rug of the political spectrum represented. We have Sikhs for Labour, another plank, which is representing the Labour Party. Frankly, from what I have seen and what I have witnessed, I'm talking about the Labour side, is frankly 3 individuals running the whole joint. There's no accountability to the Sangat. Okay? These are people in it for themselves. I won't name names here. It's a fact. There's no accountability. There's no election. You don't know who's representing who, but it's been done in the name of the Sangat, because it's marriage of convenience for the party, the Labour Party, to have these structures in place so they can say, we have consulted, we have listened, and this is what the community wants. End of story. Is that really what the community wants? So we've got barriers inbuilt by the very organizations that are supposed to be representing our interests as a Sikh community. They are not doing so. They're doing it for their own personal fulfillment, I would argue.
Thank you very much. You mentioned about the 1984 papers and the civil service as well. You mentioned Devinderjeet Singh, so I think it'd be a good time to bring him in. What are your thoughts on this?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I think, just going back to the question, because I suspect 1984 will come up again. In terms of the barriers, I think we've heard about racism. That's an obvious one, to say that Sikhs, like others, experience racism. But I want to get a bit more into the Sikh identity and why that causes issues for our political system. And secondly, the system itself, which Indrajit touched upon. the system, it doesn't matter which political party you're talking about. You take the trade union movement, it's full of racism. Anyone that comes through the Labour movement knows to become a politician, getting the support of trade unions, it can be a real challenge. So I think this is something that goes, it doesn't matter which political background you come from, is to get into the system, you will almost certainly experience that racism because of the system. But moving on to visible identity as one aspect of identity, and a very simple thing, names. You know, politicians, and I don't need to name names because you know who they are, but you look at every single member of parliament selected for the Labour Party, Conservatives or Liberal Democrats, some of them don't use Sikh names. You know, to almost become westernised, to become acceptable, they've actually adopted different names. That is something that, you know, we should actually, we're talking about future generations, we should be actually proud of our identity and our names. Names are basic things. Then take actually some of those politicians. Some of those politicians, I've controversially said this at events, I don't regard some of them as Sikhs. And I say that quite strongly because you look at their partners are often non-Sikhs. Another aspect of actually becoming part of the system. So we need to go back to our very heart, talk about Miri Piri Da Siddhant. Our visible identity means whether you have a turban, whether you have the gears, or even if you have the kara, you will be seen as different. So you will experience more racism than simply somebody with a different colour of skin. So I think these are things that are there. And Suki touched upon a subject which is really misogyny, which is the abuse of women when they enter politics. If Breeth was here, she will tell you about the misogyny she has experienced, the first Sikh woman MP. And not just from politicians, but from members of the Sikh community that resent the fact that a Sikh woman is now a politician and is making decisions that men haven't been able to do. And that's something we should take very seriously, that actually someone who's prepared to put themselves forward, sacrifice their family life, their children, more so than men, then have to experience additional forms of discrimination, which is misogyny. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
So we've had misogyny mentioned twice now. Benji, what are your thoughts on this? Is this something you've experienced?
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Yeah, you know, having abuse, and I don't think it's just a women thing, you know, men get it as well, but obviously as a female I can speak from my perspective. Even just coming onto this panel, those of you that are on Twitter will have seen that I got a lot of abuse just coming onto this panel alone. You know, people saying, how can you be a conservative and a Sikh? How can you have a dastar on your head and actually be involved in politics? How can you be brown and be involved in politics? And actually, yes, they're valid questions, but why go to the extent of some of the comments that say, you know what, take your dastar off, you're not a real Sikh, or you're a disgrace to the Khalsa Panth. You know, if you go to that extreme, I even got to the point of getting the police involved at one point because there were certain individuals who found out where I lived, and this was back in the day when I was at university, so 4 or 5 years ago, and started stalking me just because of my political views. That is just 100% out of order, and I don't want anyone, regardless of whether it's me or a male, female, anyone in any political party, in any way in the public life want to go through that. So I'll be honest about what I went through. That is just 100% out of order, and we should not stand for it. What I found very interesting, though, was who actually stood up and said something on Twitter. Okay? Sikh PA came to my defense and says, hang on a minute, this is out of order, it's abuse. And that was really grateful. You know, I'm really grateful for that. But none of the other big organizations, and they were all tagged in, decided not to say anything. And that is 100% wrong. If you have a name like, I'm not going to mention names, everyone knows who the big organizations are. If you have a name and you have people following you and you have a big platform and you are one of the loudest voices in the community, you have a right and you have a duty to stand up and say what is wrong and what is right. And if you are seeing someone, even if you disagree with their political views, being abused online, in person, wherever it may be, you have to stand up. And I was quite disappointed, and it's not the first time, but I was really disappointed that no one stood up and said that. I just want to come back to as well to what Baisab was saying, where he's talked about actually not classifying certain MPs as Sikhs. From my point of view, who are we to say that? You know, from my point of view, this is another barrier for people getting involved in politics. They don't get involved in politics because they're a Sikh. They get involved in politics because they want to do something for their constituents, for their party, for their country. Being a Sikh is a bonus because they can do Sikhi-related or Banta-related seva at the same time. We can't go around to say just because someone doesn't wear a dastar or doesn't have the right name or doesn't use their Sikh name isn't a Sikh. You know, I would never say that to someone. I've had that same stuff thrown at me, and I would never want that to go to anyone because that is just, it's just another barrier. You know, people don't want to get involved because people get thrown abuse like that. And it is abuse. I don't think that anyone should stand for it. And then the only other thing that I'd probably say is the biggest barrier is probably ourselves. And I think people forget that. Everyone in this room, you are here today. What are you doing to get involved? What are you doing to learn? You know, I got involved at the age of 18 because I was a curious kid. You know, I was just like, I want to get involved. I want to see what it's about. 8 years later, I'm getting involved. I know what the political system is. I know how things work a little bit. I'm still learning. But actually, I had the curiosity. I had the confidence. I actually had a bit of drive. And I decided, actually, I want to go for it. Whether I fall, if I fail, it doesn't matter. I'm going to learn from that. But that's what everyone needs to do. They need to have a bit of curiosity, a bit of confidence, a bit of drive, and actually just go out and about. You know, figure out what it is, whether you want to, doesn't matter what party you are, I just say get involved. If you're not involved and if you're not at the table, you can't change anything.
And finally, Lord Singh, you are probably the longest serving Sikh parliamentarian. You've been in House of Parliament, although albeit not the Commons, for quite a long time now. So what have you seen about barriers to Sikhs coming into Parliament in your time?
I've seen no end of barriers before and during Parliament. That I started life as a mining engineer. I went through a very arduous 5-year course involving working at the coalface as well. And at the end of the 5 years, I passed my first-class mine manager certificate of competency and went for an interview with the then National Coal Board. They told me to my face, the miners would not like to see a Sikh mine manager. Could you go in the scientific department? See, that was then normal. There was no race relations laws. You could not do anything about it. Now, that sort of prejudice is not something confined to the Western people or to the British people. It is natural all the world round. The worst prejudice I encountered was in Bengal, in India. The prejudice is natural. We fear that which is different. And the more different anyone is, or looks, or appears to be, the harder it is. So if you have a brown color skin, you get discrimination. If it's darker, you get more discrimination. If your appearance is a Sikh appearance with a turban and the symbols, you get more suspicion. It's something we have to recognize and combat. And we've got our spirit of Chardi Kala, we've got to fight it. It's not going to go away. Women, as has rightly been said, experience additional discrimination, misogyny, anything. We see it again and again, even today. So there are these discriminatory factors that make it extremely hard, and you have to be very committed. When I've been working on the borders of government in the interfaith work and other things for many years. And it was suggested that I should apply to be an independent peer. That was done because it was clear that I wanted to keep to Sikh principles, and neither of the parties would probably have me anyway, because I've always been firm in my beliefs. what comes first is Sikhi. At the interview, I was asked, do you realize that if you are appointed, you'll be the first turban Sikh? And I, with that thinking, immediately said, no, I don't want to be a token Sikh. I want to be, I'm happy to be there for what I can do. Even after appointment, when people were giving their congratulations, someone not very far from here said, will you speak up for Sikhs now that you've been appointed? I said, yes, I will. And because I'm a Sikh, I'll speak up for Sikhs and everyone else, any marginalized person, any group that needs support, I'll speak up for them. And I've been doing it all the time in more than 160 speeches and interventions in the Lords. Now, how do we get rid of the prejudice? Now, when people get to know you, that prejudice thins out. I've been in a workplace, and I'm sure many others of you have had the same experience. You get to know people, work with them, and they'll tell you their prejudice is about someone else. You're one of them. They accept you. We have to work at it, but I feel that as a Sikh, we should do much more, because that is one of the duties of Sikhism, to emphasize that we are all human beings. We're all equal human beings. We have to do that in every possible way, in every opportunity. Now, there's a measure of success. One measure of success in the Lords is Lord Tebbit. Now, he is known and was known for speaking against any sort of immigrants for many years. Yet he got up after hearing contributions about what Sikhs stand for and what our ethos is. He said that if there's any sort of, this is in Hansard, if there's any sort of difficulty or emergency of any sort, the safest place you can be with is with a large group of Sikhs. That is coming from Lord Tebbit. When they get to know us, it's quite a different picture. So we have to, within Parliament, outside Parliament, project Sikh values at every opportunity. We have to do that.
Thank you very much.
It's just a very brief, another point is that on the sort of political lobbying, our lobby is pretty poor. It is so poor that Sikhs are often opposing Sikhs. Now, if you see two strong lobbies, the Jewish and the Muslim lobby, and they have succeeded so far, they've got extra resources within government to deal with their problems, hate crime and so on. Hate crime among Sikhs is not recognized. It's a major issue for Jews and Muslims. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and eager to hear input from the audience. So we want to hear from you, especially if you're somebody that's tried to get involved in politics as well and has faced a barrier of some sort. If anybody wants to contribute or ask a question on that line, so contributions from the audience. Yeah.
Come on. Don't be shy.
Nobody at all?
So could I ask a question, because it sort of bothers me, which is, in the last general election, because it was a snap election, you know, 2 Sikhs got in, and they wouldn't have got in through a normal process. I have to be quite honest about that, because of the way the selection process was done. But also on the Conservative side, you know, we didn't see enough Sikh candidates come through where the party had an influence, not as much as the NEC and Labour, because they did the shortlist, but they did do the shortlist for local members to decide. So I know there are Conservative members, not just on the panel, but in the audience, because actually it is about engaging with all the political parties, and actually what sort of pressure are we applying within the Conservative Party to get, you know, Sikh politicians as well?
Does anybody on the panel want to respond to that?
So I think there's a big misconception that just because of the tactics used to get people into becoming an MP in the Labour Party, the same tactics you can use to get people into the Conservative Party. The processes are entirely different, and I know because I've been through them. You know, I'm at the point where I'm on the candidates list, I'm engaging with the central office regularly, I know what I need to do to get onto that list and to go. The beauty of, in my opinion, let me start with that, in my opinion, the beauty of being a Conservative is the fact that it's actually based on meritocracy, and the fact that if you're good enough for that job, that is what counts. It doesn't matter whether you wear the star or don't, whether you're brown, whether you're a female, whether you're from the north or London. That doesn't matter. It's whether you are best placed to serve the constituents of that local party, you will get the role. And I wouldn't want it any other way personally. That's why the main reason I joined the Conservative Party, because I don't believe in Labour's all gender or all women shortlists and BME shortlists. I just don't believe in that personally. And obviously others in this panel will have different opinions. But that is my core belief, and that's why I joined the party. And actually, we need to understand that and understand that process. So when you talk about putting political pressure on the Conservative Party, actually, why not do what Bai Sahib said at the end, what Indrajit uncle said at the end, and actually do this training, do the support mechanism, have these academies or these sessions where you can get grassroots people from the ages of 14, 15, 16 into debating societies, into training camps, actually teach them what we know, what they need to know. So when they hit 16, 17, 18, 21, 25, and they start thinking about a political career, they have the core skills and the competencies to actually do it. And I think that's the bit that we're lacking. We don't have that support structure. We don't have the training in place so that when they are 25, 30 and they want to get involved, they're actually starting from scratch from the beginning. They weren't given the opportunities and they don't have the skills or the competencies, unfortunately.
Indrajit Singh, did you want to come back on that? You were quite keen to talk.
I'm happy to, but I saw a hand go up in the audience.
Manveer Singh?
Manveer Singh. Just wanted to touch on a couple of points raised. From a Conservative perspective, and I'm a Tory, if I could vote Tory, I would. I actually declined to vote due to the 84 issue and the way it was handled by the Conservative Party. And certainly we had, from what I recall, you know, I remember Paul Uppal standing in the House of Commons, you know, stating that he would do what was necessary to, you know, get what was required from the 84 papers. And how that transpired was not what I define as desirable. I mean, the setbacks that we've experienced on that one issue, which doesn't define just UK Sikhs, it defines us globally. It's something that, to an extent, defines our history of the last, 30 plus years that it's been. So, for me, that was very, very disappointing. And dare I say it, a lot of faith, the irony of the word faith, a lot of faith in the party from our perspective is naturally going to be compromised off the back of that, given that he was, the only Sikh in government, the only Sikh in the House of Commons at the time. So I just thought I'd want to make people aware of that.
Quick comment from Indrajit Singh, we'll move on.
I'll respond to that. I think that's a spot-on comment from the audience, actually. I don't think we're party political here. I remember standing alongside Indrajit Singh when we launched the Sikh Manifesto in Southall, Birmingham, and the House of Commons. And one of the things I kept repeating was that I can guarantee you, come the 6th or 7th of May, whatever date it was, we won't have a single representative of the Sikh community in the House of Commons. And I was wishing that was wrong. That became a fact, okay? And people, some of this in the audience and on the panel, took pride in that we defeated the lone Sikh member of parliament we had. I think there's something behind this we must address as a community. We can't just work within one political party. We need to learn from others. For God's sake, the leader of the Labour Party was a Jew before Jeremy Corbyn. The leader of the Conservative Party, Michael Howard, was a Jew. Now, they work across parties, across political spectrum, and we can't confine ourselves to just one little party. And I totally agree with you that we had a representative in the governing party at the time. And we should be supporting whatever our political differences. We should put them aside and basically hold those debates and accountable questions that we need to ask those representatives behind closed doors and come to a view. And that's my personal opinion.